Hi, I'm Dr. Jean Fourie. Today, I'm going to do a lecture on brain biology. This lecture has to do with the fundamentals of what makes up the human brain. This is essential for teachers to have some idea of what is entailed with the brain. The fundamental building block of the brain is the neuron. Neurons are made up of fatty acids, and they are very numerous in the body, and we need all our neurons functioning well for learning and education to take place. So we need to understand what the neural mechanisms are in the brain, and we need to understand a little bit about the functioning of neurons, how the electrical impulses are propagated, and how different neurons communicate with each other via the synaptic cleft, and considering the implications for teachers along the way. The most important organ in our body is actually our brain. The brain is what keeps us alive, what makes us conscious, what allows us to talk and think, and it controls all our learning and our behaviors. But in order to have a little bit of understanding of the brain, we must first understand a little bit about the individual cells, the neurons, how they communicate with one another, and they are the core of brain functioning. So these specialized cells in the central nervous system and the brain and the spine and your arms and legs, they are the basic building blocks of the nervous system. There are more than 200 different types of neurons in the body, which differ in size. Some of them will extend from your spinal cord all the way to your fingertips and down to your toes, so they're quite long, and others inside the brain connecting one neuron to another might be 1,000th of an inch long. It is estimated there are about 80 to 100 billion neurons in the human brain alone. So we have very powerful neural networks. The neurons and the nervous system are not yet fully developed when a baby is born, and so some neurons are developed to keep the body alive, but more neurons will be formed as the brain and the baby matures, and this process is called neurogenesis. Another key thing that is happening during growth is a process called myelination. And this is where an external fatty sheath develops around the nerve fiber to protect it. And myelination is developing all the time as children are growing. And the other thing that is happening is that nerves are developing dendrites. Dendrites are the little connections, and they are forming in large numbers, particularly in the first 2 years of a child's life. So the growth of these neurons through myelination and dendritic proliferation is what is mainly responsible for the increase in the mass of the brain as we see children growing. So it's crucial for babies and also for young children to receive adequate nutritional food and appropriate environmental stimulation for neural development, for adequate functioning of the brain. So a typical neuron has a body and dendrites and an axon. These are features that are usually present, and the cell body has a nucleus in it. There are, in some nerves, there are many dendrites that feed into the body, but generally there is one axon leaving, and the axon gets covered in this myelin sheath, which is that process of myelination. And this process allows the nerves to conduct the electrical impulses much quicker and faster. At the end of the axon are these little terminals, and these are the terminals that will connect. The axon terminals will connect through a synapse to another nerve and the dendrites of another nerve. So it forms a mass, an interconnection of cells that are firing these electrical impulses continuously throughout the body. So the nerves are generating electricity to create these nerve impulses so that the electrical impulse can flow through the body. And they are also releasing chemicals, the neurotransmitters, which allow the two nerves to communicate with each other, and also allows the nerves to communicate with your muscles and with the glands in the body. So the electrical impulse occurs in 3 basic steps. When the neuron is at rest, called its resting potential, the negative and the positively charged chemical ions inside and outside of the neuron are equal. Once that neuron is stimulated, then the cell membrane reverses the electrical charge and an action potential is created, and so an electrical impulse travels along the nerve fiber. And once that is done, the original balance of ions is restored and the neuron is again at rest. So what is happening in neurons is that there is sensory stimulation received, let's say from your eyes or your ears or your skin or inside organs, and these sensory inputs go into the nerves and then processed in the brain, and then there might be electrical impulses coming from the brain back out to the motor, to your muscles, to move arms and legs and to move around. So there is a lot of activity happening in the human body and the brain continuously to keep you alive and breathing and heart beating. And all of this happens through these wonderful nerves, these neurons. So the information comes in through the dendrites. This is the dendrites collect in the electrical signals that goes into the cell body, which integrates the information and then generates a nerve or an impulse that goes down the axon, and that passes then into the little synapses at the end of those axons. So here is 2 nerves. The impulse goes down the dendrites, through the nerve body, along an axon, and then at a synaptic connection, where an axon and a dendrite of the next receiving neuron connect, there is this structure called a synapse, and the synapse is a gap between the 2 nerves. The nerves do not actually touch each other. They send an electrical, the electrical signal generates a chemical change in the gap, And so the neuron that is sending generates the neurotransmitter chemicals. For example, in this case, dopamine. The neurotransmitter chemical molecules sit in the synaptic cleft, and when there are many of them, they connect with the next dendrite in the postsynaptic neuron or the receiving neuron, and they cause that neuron then to fire its electrical impulse. So the synapse creates this movement from electrical impulses to chemical impulse and back to an electrical impulse. So the synapse is crucial for the nerves to talk to one another, to communicate with each other. And it is through the neurotransmitters, these particular chemicals, and there's a variety of them, and the release of these chemicals into the gap between the two neurons that causes the flow of information between the nerves. So this is constantly happening in the brain. There is constant electrical and chemical stimulation happening, and throughout the whole body as well. So there are many different neurotransmitters, and these are, here are some of them. They have an impact on your muscle action, on memory, on pain, our perception of pain and pleasure. They impact, like dopamine impacts our mood and our sleep, and also learning. The GABA impacts on brain functioning, and the norepinephrines, heart, and alertness. And we all know about serotonin, which impacts mood and sleep. So the neurotransmitters are excitatory, and they also have inhibitory effects on specific neurons that have receptors for these. Other neuromodulators have a widespread and generalized influence on synaptic transmission, and so these neuromodulators will be throughout the body, and there are some that are neurotransmitters that are specific for certain nerves. So, for instance, endorphin travels through the brain's through the circulatory system in the brain and inhibits pain transmission, so we don't feel pain, and it also enhances pleasurable feelings. The endorphins are the happy neurotransmitters. So the processes are relatively straightforward. There is an input of sensory information into the body via eyes or ears or skin, our senses. We perceive and make sense of the input that we get in the brain. The brain receives signals from the sensory neurons. We process it, we think about it, it goes into memory, and then if there is an output or an action, it might be in the form of moving, doing something with our hands or body, and that action is the output. So the nerves are involved in all of these processes: sensory input, processing in the brain, how we perceive things, and any of the output requirements. There is neural activity. So it's this is a diagram showing that the signals come in through, let's say, the eyes, in this case, sensory information. It gets processed in the brain, and there might be some output with regards to movement or behavior. The brain is converting sensory signals into significant information to act upon that. So the implications for teachers to understand what is happening in children's development. We know that children need to have adequate nutrition and also enough sleep in order for childhood development to take place, for brains to grow and to be functional. Children need exposure to numerous and varied positive learning opportunities, and each opportunity that we are exposed to allows learning to take place and allows some brain development to happen. Language, more exposure to language allows children to develop and speak those languages, different skills, exposed to music and sport and culture. Lots of different things that we are exposed to are all allowing brains to develop. So there's continual synergy between brain and body developing during childhood. And as teachers, we are building children's brains. We are ensuring that there are many strong neural connections happening in the brain. And the more the brain's architecture is strengthened, so there's lots of connections between dendrites and neurons, and the dendrites have got many little branches, and there's lots of myelination of the axons. This complex neural mechanism builds a resilient brain that is able to withstand many of life's stresses. So thank you very much. I hope that that gave you some indication of the importance of understanding the neuron for us as teachers.